Let's turn this progression into this. There are a lot of ways to spice up chord progressions, but instead of creating some sort of crazy complex series of chords, let's take a simple diatonic progression and expand it into something more. Before I get into this, please subscribe and hit the bell notification if you want to stay up to date with everything happening at the Prog School, and come and hang out on the Prog School Discord channel. We have a lot of fun over there. Now back to the lesson. The progression I want to look at today, I call the 6-7-1 progression. It's a super common progression in many styles of music. The first thing that comes to my mind is basically the entire soundtrack of Interstellar, but it's also a common progression in the world of modern rock and metal. The funk rock piece you heard in the beginning of this video is based entirely on this progression. E for 1 bar, F sharp for 1 bar, and G sharp minor for 2 bars. I'm viewing this as being in G sharp minor, hence the name 6-7-1. Flat 6 major chord, flat 7 major chord, minor 1 chord. So you have this rising progression that resolves to that 1 minor chord. This brings me to a common misconception, especially if you're new to chord progressions, that the first chord in a progression is the key of that progression. If that was the case, this would be in the key of E major or E Lydian, and that's not really the sound that this progression has. This progression feels resolved when it hits that G sharp minor. It's rising up to that chord. Therefore, I'm viewing this as being in the key of G sharp minor. I've also heard this progression called the 4-5-6 progression. These chords could be viewed as being 4, 5, and 6 in the key of B major, but this never actually uses a B major chord, and that G sharp minor is really what feels like home base here. Now, how do we take this progression to the next level? Well, here are 5 steps to turn this basic progression into something spicier. Step 1 is to add extensions to the chords. As of right now, these are all just basic 3-note triads. You have E, which is E, G sharp, B, F sharp, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and G sharp minor, G sharp, B, D sharp. Let's add a 7th to each of these. You'd get E major 7, E, G sharp, B, D sharp, F sharp dominant 7, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E, and G sharp minor 7, which is G sharp, B, D sharp, F sharp. To do this, I'm staying in the key and I'm stacking another note onto the basic triads. Here's the scale. I'm going to build these chords by starting on the root note of the chord. Let's start on E and skip every other note. That gives me my E major 7. And just by doing this, this progression already has a lot more color. Now you don't have to extend every chord in the progression. I think this F sharp dominant 7 chord in this case doesn't always have the sound I want. It's maybe a little too bluesy or too jazz. So I'm going to keep that as the basic major chord. So you get E major 7, F sharp, G sharp minor 7. One important thing to think about is how you voice these chords. I'm doing this on the guitar, but this does translate to any instrument or group of instruments. Chord voicing is a massive subject that I can't even really scratch the surface on here, but as a general tip when you're starting out, try to keep your chord voicings close to each other. So I'm not going to start way down here and then jump all the way back down. I'm going to do something that feels more natural. And even if I extend these chords, I'm going to try to keep them in the same area. These chords can be extended further as well, so let's add a 9th to all of these. You have E major 9, F sharp dominant 9, and G sharp minor 9. In this case, I'm stacking the 9th on top of the 7th chord, but you can also add a 9th to just the basic triad without adding the 7th, and that would be called an add 9 chord. Both of these options sound great, and you can combine them together as well. Maybe E major 9, F sharp add 9, and G sharp minor 9. Maybe all add 9 chords. Really beautiful. Add 9, and then minor 9. Major 9, dominant 9, add 9. All of these options sound really good. I'm going to stop here for now, but you can stack on more extensions as well, 11ths and 13ths, and then there's altered extensions that go outside the key. So far, nothing I've done has left the key of G sharp minor, and we'll keep it that way for now. Step number 2 is to do some basic chord substitution. Substitutions are exactly what they sound like, replacing a chord with a different chord, typically with a chord that has some notes in common with that original chord. I only want to talk about one basic chord substitution in this lesson, but this can get pretty complex. Let's take the E and F sharp major chords and replace them with their relative minor chords. Relative minor chords are the 6th degree chord of a major chord, or in simpler terms, a minor chord a step and a half below the major chord, or 3 frets if you're on a guitar. For the E major chord, that would be C sharp minor. E major has the notes E, G sharp, and B. And C sharp minor has the notes C sharp, E, and G sharp. Notice they have 2 of 3 notes in common, and these 2 chords are going to function basically the same in this progression. So let's do the same thing to the F sharp major chord, replace it with a D sharp minor chord. And now our progression is C sharp minor, D sharp minor, and G sharp minor. Compared to notice that this has that same rising quality, and it still resolves on that G sharp minor. But now it feels darker and moodier, and you can use that to your advantage in specific moments. In the middle solo section of my piece from the top of this video, where it slows down, I do just that, and it adds some extra intensity. So there is a very simple example of chord substitution, and that brings us to step number 3 is to add some passing chords. Passing chords are chords that are used to go between the main chords, chords that you pass by on your way to the next chord in the progression. Probably the most common passing chord in this progression is the 5 minor chord, in this case D sharp minor. This is usually added at the end of the progression to go back to the 6th chord. Because this chord is a half step below that first chord, it makes for a perfect transition. Another basic passing chord here is to play the 7 chord again on the way down. So 6, 7, 1, and then back to 7. Just working up and down. Those last 2 could be combined as well. Or vice versa. And this creates even more momentum going back to that first chord. I'm still sticking completely to the key of G sharp minor here, so let's add some passing chords between all of the main chords, and I can use those relative minor chord substitutions from earlier as passing chords. Rhythmically with the passing chords, they can either happen really quickly, or you can hang out on them for a while. Kind of depends on the sound you're going for. It can also work great to do a bunch of passing chords. In the first time through this progression in the funk rock piece, the last measure has a different chord for each beat. One of the main things I'm looking for with a bunch of passing chords like this is the bass movement. Notice that I've inverted the F sharp chord to have the 3rd A sharp in the bass. Inversions are another great way to spice up a chord progression. I have an entire lesson on inversions and slash chords if you want to dive a little deeper into them. But this inversion here is allowing for a very natural rising bass line that leads back to that first chord. Let's combine all 3 of the steps so far into one repeat of this progression. Remember, at this point, I haven't left the key of G sharp minor once. So do E major 7 to C sharp minor 7 as a passing chord, D sharp minor 7 as a sub for F sharp, then to F sharp add 9 as a passing chord to G sharp minor 9, and then one chord per beat like I just did. Now we've taken this progression from this to this. Now sometimes it does work better to just use the basic progression, but having some of these options available can help to vary this up when you need it. Step number 4 is where we're finally going to leave the key with some chromatic passing chords. Same idea as the diatonic passing chords, but there's going to be some chromatic movement in the bass. The first thing I notice is that there's one chromatic note between each of our main chords. One easy way to do this is just to pass from one chord to the next. E, E sharp, F sharp, F double sharp minor, actually G minor, G sharp minor. It's not the most inspired progression, but it works well because that chromatic movement is really strong. Here's the same idea, but I'm going to use some chord inversions. So we have E, C sharp over E sharp, F sharp, D sharp over F double sharp. I know that's a G, but technically in this key it's actually an F double sharp, up to G sharp minor. And this works better because these inverted chords are actually the 5 chords of the chord they're moving to. So C sharp is the 5 chord of F sharp. And this is providing even stronger movement upwards. Here's that first passing chord I talked about in step 3, the D sharp minor, the 5 minor chord back to E. Let's turn that into a 5 major chord, or D sharp major. It works just as well because it's super common to have a major 5 chord in a minor key, and it has that same passing movement with a slightly more interesting sound. This could also walk down chromatically. For example, going back to E, I could go F sharp, F, E, or F sharp, C sharp over E sharp, E, or I could even reverse this entire rising progression. This chromatic movement is super strong. There's this one from the solo section. It's C sharp minor 11, D sharp minor 11, G sharp minor 9, and then on the way down, G sharp minor 7, G half diminished, F sharp, and then D sharp 7, that major 5 chord. And this one uses both chord substitutions and chromatic passing chords. And there's this one from the weird quintuplet section in the middle of the song. It's E major 7, F sharp dominant 7, F double sharp diminished 7, or G diminished 7, moving up to G sharp minor 7. Then you have F sharp add 9 over A sharp, B augmented, F sharp dominant 9, and then E sharp half diminished, back to E. It's just these more colorful voicings, but I'm still following the same idea, especially if you look at that bass line at the end, right? Just filling out these chords with more colorful voicings. And step number 5 is to use common tones or stepwise melodic movement. This is focused on the actual chord voicings and the movement between them. Let's go back to the original progression, and here what I'm going to do is to keep the top note the same between all of these chords. I'm going to use the note F sharp. Or I could do... And hear how this connects these chords together perfectly because you have that common tone. I could do that with the note D sharp as well. Or up here. And this is creating some extended chords, but I'm not really thinking about that. I'm focused just on that D sharp being the top note. Let's take this one step further and have multiple common tones. I'm going to use the F sharp and the D sharp. Maybe up here. I could even use 3 common tones, maybe B, C sharp, and F sharp. And these have a different feel, but they sound beautiful. Now the other approach we can take here is to have stepwise melodic movement, meaning the highest note in the chords will move up or down within the scale. Here's a melodic line, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, just walking up the scale, and I'll add in the chords. Maybe here. Or have that melody move down, F sharp, E, D sharp. Or maybe D sharp, C sharp, B. I think the main takeaway with this one is that I'm very purposeful in the chord voicings I'm choosing, and I'm trying to connect them together with this melodic element. One last more involved idea is to have that melody move chromatically, maybe D sharp, D, C sharp, or up, F sharp, G, G sharp. And this sounds way more like jazz, but it can work really well depending on the context. Here are those chord voicings from the quintuplet section of my piece that I talked about earlier. And this is full of chromatic movement, common tones, and stepwise scale movement. The top note, for example, is all coming from the scale. The bass line, we have the chromatic descending line there. And then the inner voicings of these chords, we have a chromatic move. And then between the second and third chord, it's these two move up chromatically, and this one moves down chromatically. And then into the last chord, we have a common tone, and these two are chromatic. So the inner voices, and combine that with the other parts. So there are 5 ways to take a basic chord progression to the next level. Which of these ideas I use and how much I use them really depends on the context of the music, but all 5 of these ideas are incredibly useful. Harmony has so much power to change how we feel music, and I recommend you take your time when you're writing chord progressions. Make sure every chord is adding to the overall sound of what you're writing. And if you enjoyed this lesson, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, and I'll see you all for the next video. Until then, stay proggy.